I'm Adrienne Pedersen. Today on Upfront, Wisconsin lawmakers take on the controversy over critical race theory.
The bill specifically says that a teacher shall not teach race and sex stereotyping.
This is, number one, a bandwagon bill that started in Texas and that it is a part of the GOP greatest hits of 2021.
Two views ahead of a big vote. Then high or critically high levels of COVID transmission in Wisconsin. Are we nearing a new peak in cases? And
the group of the Taliban, they went to the guide of my apartment that I was living there, but it was good that I was not at home.
An Afghan refugee's story of escaping his home country and landing in Wisconsin.
Taking on the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Upfront with your host, Adrienne Pedersen.
Hello and thank you for joining us. Critical race theory has become a hot button issue here in Wisconsin and really across the country. On Tuesday, lawmakers in the state assembly are expected to vote on a bill that would prohibit public schools from teaching students about concepts like systemic racism and implicit bias. Schools also would be barred from training employees about the same concepts, and the same would go for state employees. We're talking now with one of the bill's sponsors, Republican Representative Scott Allen of Waukesha, and a Democratic member of the Assembly Education Committee, Representative Lakeisha Myers of Milwaukee. So I appreciate both of you being with us today to talk about this complex topic. And Representative Allen, I want to start with you because we talk about critical race theory, but what does it actually look like in the classroom? What is actually being taught?
Well, I haven't been in the classroom, so it would be difficult for me to give a third-party perspective on it. I think the important thing is when we look at the bill, we have to analyze the bill for what the bill actually says, and then debate about what the bill says and make decisions based on what the bill actually says. I'm happy to speak to that.
Yeah, so what does the bill say? What are you concerned about happening in classrooms?
Yeah, so the bill specifically says that a teacher shall not teach about race and sex stereotyping. We've been taught, I think at least I have been since very early on in my life, stereotyping is wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. Regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of sexual orientation or anything else. Stereotyping people is fundamentally wrong. We're codifying that, saying that teachers shall not teach that.
And Representative Myers, what's your take on this?
My take on this is that this is, number one, a bandwagon bill that started in Texas and that it is a part of the GOP greatest hits of 2021. I think it's a poor attempt at reverse psychology to sow seeds of division and hate by playing on the fears of individuals who want to say, we're not going to teach you about systemic racism, but we're going to deny that it actually exists. We can't deny fact. I think there are teachers who would tell you that it is making a lot of teachers very uncomfortable. As a person who was a current school administrator and a former social studies teacher, no, I did not sit in a classroom and tell students that you are blatantly racist and you must pay, which is what others have said, not particularly Representative Allen, but others that are authors of the bill mention this repeatedly, that these types of things are happening in the classroom. I've been in classrooms consistently for the last 15 years. That's not happening. What is happening is an in-depth digest and conversation about the United States of America and where we started, and about some of the systemic inequities that exist because our country was built on the slave trade and, kind of the pillaging of indigenous people, and how those policies actually still persist until today. So critical race theory is not, as a concept, being taught in any public school in the United States of America through the K through 12 level. It is a legal doctrine, a legal concept that is something that was created by UW-Madison graduate Kimberly Crenshaw, as well as Derek Bell. The tenets of critical race theory itself actually stretch back to the 1960s.
Shakespeare would describe this as much ado about nothing. There's nothing in the bill that would prohibit those kinds of conversations about the history of the United States, its struggle with slavery and post-slavery, and the systemic racism that did exist for many, many years. There's nothing in the bill that would prohibit that. This bill specifically says that teachers shall not teach race and sex stereotyping. For instance, when I look at a bill, I try to analyze it from the opposite perspective. In other words, if I were to vote against the bill, what would I be voting for? So imagine that this bill was written in a way that it said teachers shall teach the following: One, that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. Would we support that? No. Two, that an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive. Would we want teachers to teach that? No, we wouldn't. Or how about this? That an individual's moral character is necessarily determined by the individual's race or sex. Would we want teachers to teach that? The answer is no.
Are teachers teaching that in schools in K through 12 right now?
Again, what we're saying in the bill is that teachers shall not teach that. We're making
And
it
if it's not doing that,
emphatically
if it's
clear.
not currently happening, why do we need the bill? That's the question. Then why are we having
Look,
this debate
we
right
have
now? And
400
why would we teach? Why would we need the bill?
We have 424 school districts in the state of Wisconsin. For me to know what's being taught in every school district is next to impossible. I have had testimony from parents who suggest to me that some of this is being taught in the classroom. I have not been in the classroom. I'm not going to represent what teachers are individually doing. Some may be doing this. Most perhaps may be not doing this. We want to make it abundantly clear teaching race and sex stereotyping is wrong. I firmly believe in Martin Luther King's dream, and we should adhere to that strictly, that people are created equal and that we should judge people based upon their content, their character, not the color of their skin.
I want to ask where this goes forward now. So, Representative Allen, what happens on Tuesday? Does the Assembly pass this, you think?
Yes.
And Representative Myers, I think I know the answer to this, but what will Governor Evers do?
Veto, 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 and I'm happy he will veto it.
But what about potentially, I mean, we could have a Republican governor in 2023.
Well, but
Very
the
true.
important thing is if Governor Evers vetoes this, then he is saying the opposite. He is saying that teachers shall teach that one race or sex is inherently superior to another. He is saying specifically with his veto that an individual's moral character is necessarily determined by the individual's race or sex. If he vetoes this, that's specifically what he's saying. Not all this other stuff that people want to make this bill out to be. This bill is very
his
fundamentally
veto-
clear. And if
his
you a no
veto
vote
is
against
a
this bill
direct-
is in favor of racial discrimination, plain and simple.
His veto is a direct assault on what Christopher Ruffo, who is the architect of the critical race theory movement today, which would say the anti-critical race theory movement, when he said we have to successfully freeze their brand. If diversity, equity, and inclusion is the brand of the Democratic Party, I'm happy to be under that brand. When we talk about public conversations and trying to use this as a political tool, that's what the governor would be saying with his veto, that he is not about political gamesmanship, that he is about
Well, the
equity
bill
for
says
all
what the bill
children,
says.
and that he
You
is
can't
about
pack a
training.
whole bunch of stuff into the bill. I've quoted the bill multiple times. I have yet to hear Representative Myers give me one thing in the bill, a specific provision in the bill to which she objects. The bill is what the bill is, not what you pretend it to be.
Representative Myers, do you want to have a quick final word on that?
Absolutely. This is not about critical race theory. This is about sensibilities and white fragility and how we can couch what our country has gone through. This is what we're doing. This is an assault on teaching and something that we can, we're trying to assault our children from learning historical truths.
All right, two very different views here. Thank you both for coming on.
Thank you.
Coming up, COVID cases sharply rising in Wisconsin. I'll ask an expert about booster shots for adults and vaccinations for kids. And later.
Oh, in the Fort McKay life is just like almost we are been learning, the military life.
An Afghan refugee in Wisconsin tells me about life at Fort McCoy.